When we think of adaptations, the first thing that comes to mind, usually book to movie, or animated to live action, stage play to movie, maybe even regional adaptations like UK to US, or Korea to Japan. When presented the option to talk about any form of adaptation, my mind went there first. I have so much to say about failures and successes of dubbed anime or wacky decisions in video game localizations. I'm looking at you, Ace Attorney. Or whether a book is better than the movie. But I started to brainstorm and I realized that there's a really important form of communication that was missing from all of these examples. Sound. Or more specifically, music. Now, I'm a big music nerd. I've played more instruments than I can count. Not well, but I've played them. But I thought it'd be something cool and interesting to talk about. And you might be wondering, how the hell is music related to adaptation? Well, it's not really an adaptation in the traditional sense, or whatever traditional means. Maybe colloquial is better. It's kind of like going from book to movie, but it's sheet music to sound waves. Music is a bit of an ambiguous term. What is music? Some people say it's a collection of harmonies and rhythms, others just something that has a melody, and sometimes it's just a bunch of noises that we, for whatever reason, really enjoy listening to. Music can be whatever you want to be, because ultimately, it doesn't really matter. If it's banging pots and pans in your kitchen, so be it. But in a more traditional sense, aka what I learned in my many years at the RCM, is music is a combination of reading the music, playing it, and adapting the text in a way that communicates with people. Whether it's emotion or a story, it doesn't really matter, as long as you communicate something. Now, did you hear that word? Adapting the text. While words in books or novels or any sort of written form has meaning, the ink and sheet music doesn't. Unless you have some insane perfect pitch and really good theory knowledge, you won't get the full picture just by reading it. Music is pretty arbitrary, especially when it comes to old pieces that have been reprinted a million times. Like, did Chopin really put a slur there, or was it just the choice of the editors? We don't really know. And that's why interpretation is very important. Interpretation is a huge part of music. Over centuries of playing the same pieces, there are infinite amounts of interpretations of it. The dynamics, the story, the articulation, the pedaling, where you breathe, everything gets changed. While most texts have indications of how to articulate, the speed, etc., but even then, the performances are so different. Additionally, for piano, which is what I know best, depending on your hand, you might be forced to change the recommended fingering, which completely changes the sound quality of the notes. How much vibrato is used from wind and string instruments is also really key. How fast, how slow, how often, how strong. Take the Chopin competition, for example. These are phenomenal pianists from around the world, all playing the same pieces in the same hall. The only difference is their piano choice and how they play the piece. Tomasu Kuzlik and Krzyzowski all played the Opus 34 No. 1, a waltz in A-flat major, during the second round of the 2021 Chopin competition, but they all have their very own flair. Kyomasu highlights the lower neighbor pattern in the left hand, while Krzyzowski doesn't accent them as much. And then Kuzlik makes them almost inaudible. None of these are inherently wrong or right. They just add their own color to the piece. Particularly when everyone is playing the same piece, you have to find a way to stand out in the crowd. How do I adapt this text and make it my own? An important part of musical adaptation is not only interpreting the written piece, but adapting the text into your mind. It sounds like voodoo foofy magic, but it's a real thing. Audiation, seeing the notes and hearing them in your mind, and then internalizing them is both extremely important and extremely hard. I played piano for 12 years and still struggle with audiation. It is hearing the sound that you want in your head while making the sound at the instrument. And because brains like to be lazy and take shortcuts, keeping your ear active during the duration is so hard. And that alone will change your adaptation, sometimes varying each time you yourself play, let alone between musicians. Just a few days ago, I was working on a piece, and for some reason, I just could not hear the connection between two notes. And I was articulating the phrase in a very different way that wasn't necessarily intended. And it had implications for how I played the rest of the phrase and how I played the rest of the piece, just because of these two notes that I just could not put together in my head. Adapting the text into something that is able to be curated and expressed effectively is a large plot point in Your Lie in April. Your Lie in April is an anime about young classical musicians, Kosei, who's a pianist, and Kaori, who's a violinist. And while there's a larger overarching plot, Your Lie in April spends a lot of time divulging how difficult it can be to express music. When Kosei doesn't adapt the text any further than ink to keys, his performance is heavily critiqued, even without making a single mistake. It's almost like bad acting in a movie. No matter how good the source material is, if your performance stinks, it's not going to be enjoyable for anybody. But let's move away from the mental game that is music and talk about something a little bit simpler, but no less interesting: leitmotifs. A leitmotif is basically a melodic idea that repeats throughout a piece of media and is usually used to connect different sections of that piece of media to tell the story. These leitmotifs, usually in franchises, need to retain enough of the original melodic idea to be recognized, but also be transformed enough to feel new. A lot of the time they're used at the beginnings of movies and contain spoilers for the end, or are used for emotional manipulation, as evil as that sounds. The Legend of Zelda, a series that I adore, has a lot of themes that are reused to connect all the games, characters, races, regions, storylines, character dynamics, etc. The games are connected through the Fairy Fountain theme. Town themes like the Zora domain. And their variations in Tears of the Kingdom. They change keys, melody, and phrasing to indicate something is off before interacting with the characters or the environment to understand why. In all these instances, the music changes to fit the new purpose of the new game, but they still connect the players to anything that they'd consumed previously. The Lord of the Rings series is a fantastic example. The Shire theme, which is in the Concerning Hobbits OST, is played in the Shire when they begin their journey out of the Shire, and then as the larger group sets out onto their mission. It's altered as things begin to change for the hobbits. The theme is heard less and less the further they travel from home. When Sam and Frodo argue over the ring and Frodo tells Sam to go home, a variation of that theme is heard again.
Go home.
The Shire theme is also hinted at in the Fellowship theme. Fragmented pieces throughout. But then fully played. In The Ring Goes South, more variation, but very quiet in the background, set up like a cannon in the woodwinds. And while these variations stay loyal to the source material, or the original theme or the original leitmotif, they are adapted to fit their individual purposes. Like forcing the audience to think of happy things during sad scenes, or for them to remember family during times of struggle in the movie. While 10 minutes isn't enough to go into everything that I want to talk about for all three topics, all of this is just to show that music has a very important role in storytelling. And just like books to movies, stage plays to animes, to video games, to comics, to whatever, music also has a very interesting way of adaptation. It can be really complicated if you get into the nitty-gritty of it, but it's a form of adaptation that people tend to forget, even though it's so important, especially in Adaptations for TV shows and movies, and well, I guess even musicals. Music is extremely important in those types of media. And while music doesn't tend to be the star of adaptations, it almost takes a supporting role. But even the supporting roles have their part to play in pulling off the production.